The Beresfords' sitting room had never aspired to grandeur. It was, as Tuppence often said, a room that had grown into itself rather than been decorated. The furniture was a collection of their adventures, a sturdy oak table bought for almost nothing at a country sale, a rug acquired in a hasty bargain during their Paris days, and a brass lamp that had survived 2 wars and still leaned slightly to the left despite Tommy's repeated efforts at repair. Books, old photographs, and a comfortable muddle of cushions softened the effect, so that even on a grey afternoon one felt that the house smiled at its inhabitants. On that particular day, rain rattled against the window panes in fits and starts, as though unable to decide whether to commit to a proper downpour. Tuppence sat in her favourite armchair, legs tucked beneath her, with a novel open and only half attended to. Tommy, less romantically inclined, was inspecting the clock on the mantelpiece and wondering aloud whether it was losing time again. The doorbell rang with a brisk insistence. At this hour of the afternoon, visitors were not expected. Tommy straightened, tugged at his jacket, and went to answer. When he returned, he carried not a caller, but a parcel, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with string, and bearing an unfamiliar postmark. "Well," he announced, placing it on the table between them, "either someone has sent us fruitcake or a small bomb. In either case, I suggest you open it. You always had the steadier nerves." Tuppence eyed the package with an interest sharper than her husband's levity suggested. The paper was thick, almost old-fashioned, and the handwriting on the label had a tremor, the letters uneven but deliberate. She reached for the scissors and snipped the string. The paper fell away in layers, revealing a worn, leather-bound volume and a folded letter resting on top. Tommy frowned. "That doesn't look like cake." "No," Tuppence said slowly, lifting the book. "It looks like trouble." The book was heavy, its cover cracked with age, the kind of leather that had once been polished but now bore the marks of many hands. Embossed faintly on the spine was a series of numbers rather than a title. When Tuppence opened it, the pages revealed columns of figures, symbols, and seemingly random words. "A codebook," she murmured. Tommy's frown deepened. "Good Lord, I haven't seen one of those since we both had to carry them everywhere. Why would someone post us this?" "The letter may tell us," Tuppence replied. She unfolded the single sheet of paper, written in that same uneven hand. Her eyes moved quickly across the page, her lips pressing into a thin line as she read aloud. "The mission has returned. There are names that should have remained buried. Beware those who ask questions. Time has not erased guilt. T." Tommy whistled softly. "Sounds dramatic enough for a penny thriller. Do you suppose it's a prank? Some fellow from the old days, amusing himself at our expense?" Tuppence laid the letter on the table and regarded it steadily. "Look at the handwriting. It shakes. That's not a prankster's flourish. That's fear or age. And why send us this, if not for a reason?" Tommy shrugged, unwilling to concede too easily. "Perhaps it was misdelivered. The post does muddle things, or some historian unearthed it and thought we'd be interested." "Really, Tommy?" Tuppence leaned back in her chair, eyes thoughtful. "Does that sound like the kind of note an eager historian would send? No, it smells of something else entirely. Someone is frightened. Someone believes the past isn't finished." The rain outside strengthened, hammering now against the glass. The cosy room seemed suddenly less secure, as if the weather had chosen sides in their conversation. Tommy, sensing the change in atmosphere, attempted levity again. "Well, if this is the beginning of a new adventure, it has chosen the most inconvenient time. I was hoping for a quiet autumn, gardening, reading, the occasional crossword, not espionage." "Adventures," Tuppence said firmly, "rarely wait for convenience. Besides, do you truly wish to turn your back if someone is in danger?" He studied her, recognizing the spark in her eye that had led them into scrapes before. Scrapes that had ended in triumph, yes, but also in more grey hairs for him. Yet there was affection in his exasperation. "I suppose not," he admitted. "But let's at least be practical. Who on earth still remembers the mission? Whatever it was, it must date back nearly 30 years. "Precisely why it intrigues me," Tuppence countered. She tapped the codebook with one finger. "A relic of the war. Someone wanted this kept hidden. Now it has found its way to us. That cannot be coincidence." She rose and crossed to the bookshelf, retrieving a small notebook in which she habitually recorded odd thoughts, phrases, and suspicions. Sitting again, she copied the words of the letter carefully, as though fearing the original might vanish. Tommy watched her with a sigh. "You've decided, haven't you? We're going to pursue this." "Not decided," she corrected, "merely acknowledged. We are already involved, whether we like it or not." A log in the fireplace cracked, sending up a sudden shower of sparks. The flame flared and settled, casting long shadows against the walls. Tommy felt the weight of memory press against him, nights of coded messages, whispered plans, faces of comrades long gone. The war was over, yet here it was, knocking again at their door. Tuppence, seeing the flicker of unease cross his face, softened her tone. "It may prove to be nothing more than a dying man's fancy, a final attempt to unburden himself. But if there is truth in it, if the past has indeed returned, then perhaps we are the only ones who can untangle it." He managed a wry smile. "You always did have a talent for persuasion. Very well. We shall make inquiries, discreetly. But I warn you, Tuppence, if this ends with me chasing shadows in the rain, I shall blame you entirely." "That's quite fair," she said serenely. They fell into companionable silence, each turning over the matter privately. The codebook lay between them like an intruder, its pages whispering secrets from another age. Tommy wondered whether it held the names of agents, safe houses, betrayals long forgotten. Tuppence wondered, more pointedly, who feared its resurfacing enough to send it to them with such urgency. At length Tommy rose to pour them both a drink. He handed Tuppence her glass with exaggerated gallantry. "To peaceful retirement," he toasted dryly. She touched her glass to his, eyes dancing though her voice was grave. "To the end of peaceful retirement, I suspect." As the evening deepened and the rain persisted, the parcel's presence seemed to fill the room more than its size allowed. It was no longer simply a book and a letter, it was a summons. And though Tommy might protest, both knew they had already answered it. The past had found them again, and this time it carried secrets that refused to remain buried. The morning after the parcel's arrival dawned in a pale, reluctant light. A crust of frost coated the hedgerows, and the garden path glittered with the delicate glaze of winter. Tommy, shrugging into his overcoat, declared that the day was most unsuitable for conspiracies, but Tuppence was already fastening her scarf with the brisk efficiency of a general marshalling troops. They had agreed, after much firelit debate the previous evening, that Colonel Spence was the obvious man to consult. He had been their senior in certain delicate matters during the war, a man of quiet discretion and unimpeachable honour. If anyone could make sense of the codebook and the cryptic warning, it was Spence. The colonel lived some miles away in a village whose name appeared to have been designed chiefly to baffle outsiders. The journey by motorcar was cold but uneventful, hedges flashing past, fields lying bare and brown under a pewter sky. Tommy kept his hands tight on the wheel, while Tuppence, wrapped in a plaid rug, watched the scenery with half-closed eyes, her mind elsewhere. When they reached Spence's house, a solid Georgian building with ivy clinging stubbornly to its front, they were greeted by the man himself. He was older, naturally, but still straight-backed, with the clipped moustache of an era when officers measured themselves by posture as well as courage. His handshake was firm, his eyes alert, though shadowed with age. "Beresfords," he said warmly, ushering them inside. "I wondered if you'd come. I heard whispers, you know, rumours, and now you appear on my doorstep, carrying what precisely?" They were soon settled in his study, a room that seemed to have grown out of bookshelves. Volumes lined the walls from floor to ceiling, military histories jostled with classical poetry, and a great leather armchair presided near the hearth. A decanter of sherry gleamed invitingly on the table. Tuppence wasted no time. She produced the codebook and the letter, laying them carefully before him. Spence's hands, though steady, lingered a fraction longer on the book's cracked cover than one might expect. "Good Lord," he murmured. "So it has come back." Tommy leaned forward. "Then you recognize it?" "I should say I do. This was issued to a very particular unit. A mission, one we never speak of. You'll have read about dashing exploits in the newspapers, but this was different. It vanished. gone without trace. Vanished? Tuppence repeated softly. Spence nodded, pouring 3 small glasses of sherry with absent-minded precision. Our orders were clear, a team of 6, carrying information too sensitive to transmit by wireless. Names, codes, a list of certain men and women who played both sides during the war. If that list had fallen into the wrong hands, well, entire networks would have collapsed. Tommy accepted his glass, staring at the colonel. And it did fall, didn't it? No, Spence said grimly. It simply disappeared. Neither we nor the enemy ever recovered the couriers. Some said they'd been ambushed, others whispered of treachery within the ranks. The official line was that they perished bravely, but even then, there were doubts. He held up the codebook as though it were an exhibit in court. If this has returned, then perhaps one of them survived. Or perhaps, his voice dropped, the traitor has finally decided to play his hand. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Tuppence leaned closer, her eyes bright. Colonel, do you know who suspected whom? Was there ever an inquiry? Spence's lips tightened. Unofficially, yes. Fingers pointed toward Major Redfern. Clever man, but too clever by half, some said. He had sympathies, socialist leanings that raised eyebrows. But he died in 47 motor accident. If he was guilty, he carried it to the grave. Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence, reading the skepticism in her expression. And yet, she said gently, men have been known to die twice, in rumour, if not in fact. But tell me, why now? Why send this to us after all these years? Spence sighed and set his glass down. That I cannot answer, but I will tell you something else. In the past year, 3 men who were tangentially connected to that mission have died, all elderly, all ostensibly of natural causes. Yet the clustering troubles me. Sergeant Milson, heart attack, Captain Vaughan, stroke, even young Lethbridge, though he was hardly young any longer, pneumonia. On their own, unremarkable. Together, disturbing. Tommy frowned. It might simply be the toll of years. Perhaps, Spence allowed. Or perhaps someone is tying up loose ends. The words hung in the air like smoke. Tuppence felt a shiver despite the warmth of the fire. She thought of the letter's warning, names that should have remained buried. The implication was unmistakable. To lighten the moment, or perhaps to escape it, Spence proposed a walk. They wrapped themselves once more in coats and mufflers and stepped into the crisp afternoon. The countryside lay hushed beneath a pale sun. Fields edged with frost, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Their breath smoked in the cold as they followed a narrow path skirting the hedgerows. As they walked, the colonel spoke in the reflective tones of a man both remembering and regretting. The war left so many ghosts, not just those who died, but those who lived with secrets. Some secrets, you see, refuse to lie down. They rise again, like revenants. "Do you believe," Tuppence asked, "that one of the survivors is still alive, pulling strings even now?" Spence glanced at her, eyes troubled. "I don't know what I believe. I know only that the reappearance of this book is no accident. Someone has chosen you, Beresfords, to carry this burden forward. Perhaps they trusted you. Perhaps they wished to see if you would falter." Tommy gave a short laugh, more rueful than amused. "Faltering is not in my wife's vocabulary. As for me, I would have preferred roses and crossword puzzles. But it seems we have been enlisted again." They reached a small stone bridge over a stream, the water running fast and dark beneath. The colonel paused there, leaning on the parapet. His breath steamed in the air. "If I were you, I'd tread carefully. Whoever sent that letter may already be watching, and if there is still a traitor among us, he will not welcome questions." A rook cawed from a bare tree, startling in the silence. The afternoon seemed suddenly darker, the landscape less friendly. Tuppence, gazing down at the water, felt again that electric thrill which always came at the threshold of danger. It was not fear, though fear lurked at the edges, but recognition. The game was afoot. They returned to the house as the light waned. Spence at the door clasped their hands firmly. "You must decide for yourselves how far you wish to pursue this. But remember, old ghosts do not rest quietly." Driving home through the gathering dusk, Tommy broke the silence first. "He suspects Redfern. Dead nearly 20 years and still accused. Convenient, isn't it? A corpse makes a very safe scapegoat. Too safe, Tuppence agreed. She adjusted the rug around her knees, eyes fixed ahead. I don't believe in convenient scapegoats. These deaths, Milson, Vaughan, Lethbridge, they are too tightly woven. Someone is pulling a thread, and I mean to find out who. Tommy sighed, turning the wheel as they entered a narrow lane. I knew you would say that. It seems retirement is postponed indefinitely. Her smile flickered in the dim light. Did you ever truly believe we were retired? The motorcar rattled on through the winter evening, carrying them back to their cottage and into the heart of a mystery that had waited decades to be solved. The past was no longer behind them. It walked beside them, cloaked and persistent, whispering of betrayal and unfinished business. And somewhere, unseen, another hand was already moving its pieces on the board. Snow had threatened all morning, but never quite committed itself. Instead, the sky hung heavy and pale, as though undecided between shedding light or shadow. The village green lay muffled in quiet, the cottages crouched beneath their roofs, smoke curling upwards in disciplined little plumes. Vicarages, Tommy observed as he swung the gate shut behind them, have a way of appearing tranquil, even when everyone inside is plotting something. Tuppence smiled. That's because they combine two of the Englishman's strongest instincts, religion and gossip. If you want the truth about anyone in the parish, you'll find it written in the records, or whispered over a tea table. The vicarage itself was a square, respectable building with ivy drooping across the windows. Its front garden displayed the sturdy neatness of a household accustomed to both visits and scrutiny. They were admitted by a maid who spoke little and padded silently away to fetch her mistress. It was Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, who greeted them first, a fluttering woman with a quick smile and flour still dusting her cuffs, as though she had come directly from the kitchen. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, how delightful. My husband will be with you presently. He has been wrestling with his sermon. Do sit down. Tea at once, of course. They were ushered into a drawing-room that smelled agreeably of baking. Lace curtains softened the daylight, while the fire burned with a cheerful crackle. A low table stood ready with china cups, a plate of scones and a jam pot gleaming ruby red. The effect was so thoroughly cosy that one might have forgotten all about wartime secrets, codebooks and threatening letters. Almost. Mrs. Clement talked as she poured. It isn't often we have visitors from your part of the world. You'll find our village dull, I'm afraid. Though, now I think of it, we did have a rather unusual caller only the other day. Unusual? Tuppence repeated lightly, reaching for a scone. Yes, a gentleman, very quiet. Asked questions about families in the parish. Curious ones, really. Wanted to know who lived here during the war, whether any of the older names remain. Mrs. Clement paused, butter knife poised. I dare say it was harmless, but his manner struck me as, how shall I put it, furtive. Tommy raised an eyebrow at Tuppence across the rim of his teacup. Their suspicions, it seemed, were not theirs alone. At that moment, the vicar entered, a kindly man with spectacles sliding down his nose and an air of mild distraction. He greeted them warmly, listened to their request, and nodded. The parish records, yes. I keep them locked in the vestry cupboard. If you wish to consult them, we can walk across to the church presently. Mrs. Clement, perhaps another cup for our guests first? Tuppence, ever polite, agreed, but her thoughts had sharpened like needles, a stranger asking the same questions, here, in this quiet corner of England. Coincidence was a word she distrusted. After tea, the vicar produced a key from his pocket and led them along the lane to the church. The building loomed grey and ancient, its spire stabbing the wintry sky. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with polish and candle wax. Echoes stirred at their footsteps, reminding them that centuries of voices had murmured here before. The vestry cupboard yielded a stack of heavy registers bound in worn leather. Spencer's unit, Tuppence recalled, had passed through the village briefly for training and billeting. Their names might appear here, hidden among baptisms and burials. Tommy and the vicar busied themselves with earlier volumes, but it was Tuppence who noticed the irregularity. One book lay open where she had turned it, and there, between baptisms of 1943, a page had been torn clean away. Her hand hovered above the ragged edge. "Curious," she said softly. The vicar peered over his spectacles. "Indeed, that shouldn't be. Records are to be kept complete. Yet someone, Tuppence murmured, did not agree. Tommy frowned. What would be worth tearing from a parish register? Baptisms? Burials? Perhaps a name someone wishes erased, Tuppence suggested. If a certain woman appeared here, lodging during those years, her trace might remain. The vicar looked troubled, muttering about mischief and young curates being careless. His curate, a tall, nervous fellow named Hughes, appeared then at the vestry door, blinking as though caught in an intrusion. "Ah, Hughes," the vicar said, "did you by any chance notice a missing page in the registers?" Hughes flushed, stammered something inaudible, and excused himself hastily. Tommy watched him go with narrowed eyes. "There's guilt in that walk," he murmured. Tuppence shook her head. Or embarrassment. Some men grow flustered at the mere suggestion of responsibility. No, Tommy, the curate is too obvious, which means he is likely innocent. They copied what names they could, noting a handful that connected faintly to Spence's recollections. Then, thanking the vicar, they emerged once more into the lane. The air was already dimming toward evening, clouds bruising the horizon. As they walked back, Tommy suddenly stiffened. Ahead, at the far end of the green, a figure lingered, a man in a dark overcoat, hat pulled low. He stood as though uncertain whether to approach or retreat. "That must be him," Tommy muttered. "The stranger." But before they could quicken their pace, the man turned abruptly and vanished down a side street. Tommy broke into a trot, but by the time he reached the corner, the lane stretched empty, doors closed, curtains drawn. Only the echo of retreating footsteps suggested he had ever been there. He rejoined Tuppence, slightly winded. "Slippery fellow. He knew we were coming." "Or knew we were watching," she corrected. Her gaze lingered on the deserted street. "He doesn't wish to be found, which in my experience means he must be found." They returned to the car, the chill seeping through their coats. As Tommy started the engine, Tuppence sat in silence, fingers tapping the folded notes in her lap. The missing page haunted her. Someone had gone to the trouble of erasing a name from the parish's memory. And someone else, or perhaps the same person, was still here, walking the same streets, asking the same questions. It was no longer only ghosts of the past. The present had joined the game. The evening lay cold and still about the cottage. Frost had traced delicate patterns across the windows, and the fire in the sitting room burned low, throwing out more glow than heat. Tommy had retired to his armchair with a newspaper folded at a strategic angle, while Tuppence knitted with a concentration that suggested the scarf's destiny was far grander than the recipient's neck. Outside, the wind shifted in the hedgerows, carrying with it a silence too heavy for comfort. It was Tuppence who noticed first. A sound, not loud but distinct, a faint scrape at the back door. She lowered her knitting needles, eyes narrowing. "Tommy!" He looked up, brow furrowed. Then they both heard it again, the unmistakable creak of a latch yielding under pressure. Tommy sprang to his feet, newspaper sliding forgotten to the floor. "I'll see who's playing tricks," he muttered, crossing to the hall. But even as he reached for the door, a crash sounded from the sitting-room window. They hurried back to find the curtains stirring in the draught. Glass splintered inward. The cottage seemed to hold its breath. In the dimness beyond, footsteps thudded, swift, purposeful. By the time Tommy had flung the door wide, the intruder was gone, the night swallowing him whole. "Blast it," Tommy growled, scanning the garden. Frost glittered under the moonlight, but no figure moved among the hedges. He secured the window and turned back inside. It was Tuppence who gasped first. "Tommy, the mantelpiece!" Where the codebook had lain, nestled discreetly among photographs and an ill-tempered clock, there was now only a slip of paper. She picked it up, her face unreadable as she read aloud, "Leave the past buried." The words were written in a heavy hand. Each letter pressed as though with grim determination. Tommy's jaw tightened. So that's their game. They could have stolen the silver, or anything else they fancied. But no, it's the codebook they wanted. "And they left us a message," Tuppence said softly. Her fingers trembled, though her voice did not. "Someone knows we've begun to pry." Tommy began pacing, the old soldier's stride reasserting itself. "We're calling the police. This is housebreaking, burglary." But Tuppence shook her head, eyes fixed on the slip of paper. "No, Tommy. The police would treat it as common theft. They wouldn't understand the weight of what was taken. This is bigger than village constables and reports in triplicate. He turned sharply. Bigger, yes, but that doesn't mean we face it alone. I won't have you in danger, Tuppence. She looked up, her expression softened by affection but steeled by conviction. Danger has never asked our permission before. We can't retreat now. Whoever left this intends to frighten us into silence. If we oblige them, we may never learn why the past refuses to rest. For a moment they stood at an impasse, their breaths quick in the frosty air of the broken window. Then Tommy sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You'll be the death of me, woman. Very well, but we must proceed carefully. Of course, she said, the faintest glimmer of triumph in her eyes. They began to search the room. It was Tuppence who crouched near the hearthrug and pointed. Look! Boot prints, clear impressions in the frost that had blown in across the sill. The tread was heavy, the shape unmistakable. Military, Tommy muttered, kneeling beside her. Issue boots. I'd know that pattern anywhere. Whoever he was, he's no ordinary burglar. The trail led to the door and vanished beyond the garden gate, but within the room itself another clue lingered, less obvious, yet more telling. On the hearth by the andirons a faint smear of grey ash had settled, its scent lingering sharp in the air. Tuppence leaned close, inhaled, then nodded slowly. Cigars. Not the sort you buy at the corner shop. Something stronger. Foreign. Tommy's brow furrowed. Good Lord. Colonel Spence mentioned once, didn't he, that Redfern smoked those wretched things constantly. The others complained they could smell him before they saw him. Redfern is dead, Tuppence reminded gently. Yet the ash remains. Perhaps someone who admired his habits, or someone who wishes us to think he still walks among the living. They stared at the smear in silence, each lost in speculation. Then Tommy rose, squaring his shoulders. Whoever it was, he knows our address, our habits. He may return. Then let him, Tuppence said coolly. We'll be ready. The fire burned lower as the hours passed. They set the broken window right enough to keep out the worst of the cold, then sat together, listening to the wind prowl around the corners of the house. Their cottage, usually so secure in its muddled comfort, felt suddenly less like a haven and more like the stage of an unseen play, the actors waiting in the wings. At last Tommy spoke again, voice low. Tuppence, there's something else. I keep thinking of Spence's words about those deaths. Milson, Vaughan, Lethbridge. If someone is silencing survivors, then we may already be on their list. She reached for his hand, clasping it firmly. Then we must solve it first. The best defence is truth, and we are not without our wits. He smiled grimly. No, indeed. But we are without that codebook now. Our only tangible proof has been stolen. Not stolen, Tuppence corrected. She held up the slip of paper again, its words stark against the lamplight. Exchanged. They left us this in return, which means they want us to know we are noticed. They could have taken it quietly, but they didn't. That's a warning, Tommy, and warnings, in my experience, are as good as invitations. The clock on the mantel chimed the hour with a tone too loud for the quiet room. Tommy rose, drawing the curtains tightly across the broken pane. Very well, we shall accept their invitation, but heaven help them if they think the Beresfords are easily frightened. Outside, the night deepened, and the footprints in the frost slowly faded as though the earth itself wished to erase them. But inside, in the glow of the fire, two figures sat resolute, their determination burning hotter than the embers. The first warning had been delivered, but far from turning back, Tommy and Tuppence knew they were walking deeper into the shadows. The train from the countryside slid into London beneath a dusk that painted the city in tones of brass and soot. Lamps glimmered through the fog, carriages rattled along slick cobbles, and the air smelt of damp stone and coal smoke. Tommy, stepping onto the platform, tugged his collar higher against the chill, while Tuppence, eyes alight, declared that London always looked its most conspiratorial in November. Their destination lay in St. James's, an Edwardian club so grand and exclusive that its very windows seemed to frown upon the uninitiated. Carved oak doors admitted them into a world of quiet footsteps and thick carpets. Attendants moved with hushed efficiency, and chandeliers glowed like constellations in miniature. Sir Lionel Greaves was waiting in the smoking room, a tall figure with silvered hair, his evening coat cut to perfection. His features bore the unmistakable stamp of privilege, but his eyes, keen, sardonic, belonged to a man who had seen behind curtains most people never guessed existed. He greeted Tommy and Tuppence with cordiality edged by irony. "Well, well," he said, ushering them toward a table already laid in a private alcove. "The Beresfords. Still inquisitive, I see. Do sit down. It will be a pleasure to dine with amateurs who have nonetheless survived longer than many professionals." The table gleamed under candlelight. Silver chargers, crystal glasses, and dishes borne in by waiters so silent they seemed more apparition than servant. Conversation, too, flowed easily, until it veered toward the subject that had drawn them there. "The mission," Greaves said at last, swirling the wine in his glass. "Yes, I remember it. A dangerous affair undertaken at the height of chaos. We needed to spirit a list out of Europe, a list of names. Double agents, informants, men and women who wore two faces. Some were valuable, others poisonous. That list would have decided their fates. To possess it was to hold a knife at the throat of more than one government." "And it vanished," Tommy prompted. "Indeed." Greaves smiled thinly. "Vanished into the fog of war. Convenient, was it not? Convenient for those on the list, convenient for those with something to hide. But here you are digging again. May I ask, why?" Tuppence met his gaze squarely. "Because the past seems unwilling to stay buried. Someone has taken steps, violent steps, to keep it quiet. That suggests its relevance is not yet over." Greaves studied her for a moment, then inclined his head. "You have the Beresford instinct, I see, always meddling where angels fear to tread. But let me warn you, if you stir the ashes too thoroughly, you may find fire still smoulders." Their meal continued, each course a masterpiece of French indulgence, pheasant glazed in wine, soufflé so light it might have floated free of the dish. Yet beneath the rich sauces and murmured toasts, the undercurrent of tension grew. At the next table sat a portly gentleman in tweeds who eyed them with ill-disguised curiosity. Tuppence noted the small red pin in his lapel, a badge associated with certain radical clubs. When he rose and moved away, she caught a whisper between him and a waiter. Quick, urgent. "Who is he?" she asked. "Pritchard," Greaves said dismissively. "A relic of the old Labour left, forever railing against capitalism. Spends half his time talking about Moscow. A bore, but mostly harmless. Still, such men often hover where secrets are concerned." The courses ended with sherry. Greaves raised his glass, then paused. His expression shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. "Excuse me," he muttered, setting the glass down. He rose, swayed slightly, and walked toward the corridor. Tommy frowned. "What on earth?" Moments later, a waiter hurried past. Then came the muffled thump of a body falling. They found Greaves sprawled on the carpet of the side hall, his complexion ashen, his lips tinged blue. The glass of sherry lay shattered nearby, a stain darkening the rug. "Good Lord," Tommy breathed, kneeling. Tuppence felt for a pulse. Faint, fluttering, but present. "Poison," she whispered. "Quick, call for help." Attendants rushed in, one running for a physician. The portly man in tweeds appeared again, feigning surprise a shade too loudly. "Terrible, simply terrible. Did he drink too quickly?" Tommy's eyes narrowed. "Or drink too much of the wrong thing." Greaves stirred faintly as they lifted him to a couch. His lids flickered, and in a voice rasping like torn silk he managed two words. "Find the woman." Then he collapsed again, senseless. The physician arrived with brandy and restoratives. Greaves lingered on the edge, breath ragged, before stabilizing. He would live, the doctor said, though recovery would be slow. In the confusion, Pritchard attempted to slip away. Tommy intercepted him near the cloakroom. "Leaving so soon?" The man flushed, tugging at his scarf. "I've business, urgent business." "I dare say you have," Tommy said. "Strange, isn't it, how Greaves drinks poison just as you're whispering in corners?" "Preposterous. I've nothing to do with it." His bluster rang false, though fear glistened beneath. Tuppence appeared beside them, cool as ever. "Then you'll have no objection to remaining while the police are called. Innocent men don't run, Mr. Pritchard." For a moment he looked ready to argue, but the arrival of a constable, summoned by the club staff, silenced him. He was taken aside for questioning. Later, in the quiet of their hotel room, Tommy and Tuppence reviewed the evening. "Find the woman," Tommy repeated, pacing. That's what Greaves said. Who is she? The courier Spence mentioned, the shadow in the photograph? Perhaps, Tuppence murmured. She sat at the dressing table, unpinning her hat, her expression thoughtful. But Greaves nearly died to say it. That suggests she is the key. The question is, did Pritchard poison him, or is Pritchard merely a convenient distraction? Tommy stopped pacing. You don't think he did it? I think he was meant to look as though he did it. He is loud, suspicious, easy to blame. But the waiter who poured the sherry, did anyone watch him closely? Servants are too often invisible. They sat in silence for a moment, the noises of London filtering through the window, a cab horn, the cry of a newsboy. Somewhere far below, footsteps echoed on the pavement, purposeful in the fog. Tuppence closed her eyes briefly. She could still see Greaves collapsing, the fear in his eyes, the urgency of his final words. Find the woman. The command hung in the air like a tolling bell. Tommy broke the silence. We've lost the codebook. Now Greaves is silenced. Whoever orchestrates this is 2 steps ahead. We must catch up. Yes, Tuppence said softly. Her gaze hardened. And we shall. But we must be cleverer than they expect. The woman is our path. Find her, and the rest will follow. The candle on the table guttered, throwing long shadows across the room. Somewhere in the city, the enemy moved unseen, erasing names and lives with equal ease. But the Beresfords, undaunted, prepared to follow the trail into whatever darkness awaited. The game had shifted, and now the stakes were mortal. The rain had begun before noon and showed no inclination of ceasing. It drummed against the windows, slid down the panes in silver rivulets, and turned the garden beyond into a blurred wash of greys and browns. Inside the Beresfords' sitting room, the fire crackled with a valiant determination, but even its cheer could not lighten the mood. Tuppence sat close to the hearth, a photograph spread on her lap. It had fallen from between the pages of the codebook before it was stolen, and she had kept it aside, almost by instinct. Now she examined it with the patience of a cat watching a mouse hole. The picture was the sort soldiers took in groups, posed, hurried, half-formal. A cluster of men in uniforms smiling stiffly at the camera. In the corner, just behind them, a figure stood slightly apart, a woman. Her face was partly in shadow, her features indistinct. Yet there was something about the tilt of her head, the line of her shoulders, that tugged at Tuppence's memory. Tommy, sprawled in the opposite chair with a pipe clenched between his teeth, glanced up from his newspaper. You've been staring at that thing for half an hour. Either it's a masterpiece or it hides the secret of the universe. Neither, Tuppence replied absently. But look here, Tommy. This woman, do you see? He leaned forward, squinting. Barely. She could be anyone. A clerk, a nurse, a passer-by. No, I've seen her before. Briefly, but I know it. During one of our wartime briefings. London, I think. She never spoke, but she was there, listening. They didn't introduce her. I assumed she was some sort of assistant. But why is she in this photograph? And why unnamed? Tommy shrugged. Perhaps she didn't matter. Tuppence's eyes glinted. On the contrary, people who are not introduced often matter very much indeed. The rain lashed harder against the windows as though underscoring her point. She rose, pacing the room. Greaves's last words, "Find the woman." He meant her, I'm sure of it. Tommy tapped his pipe out with a sigh. And how exactly do you propose we find a woman whose name we don't know, whose face is half hidden, and who may have vanished 25 years ago? By looking, Tuppence said simply. Every shadow leaves a trace, and if she belonged to the unit, however loosely, her trace will be somewhere. It was days later, after inquiries that led them through dusty files and half-forgotten anecdotes, that they found their way to a small seaside town. The train left them at a platform smelling of salt and rust, gulls wheeling overhead. The sea lay beyond, restless under a pewter sky. The boarding house stood a street back from the front, a narrow building with peeling paint and curtains that looked as though they had been drawn for decades. The sign read Seaview House, though the view had long since been obscured by newer construction. The landlady who answered their knock was a nervous woman in her 60s, her hands perpetually smoothing her apron. She ushered them into a parlour smelling faintly of damp and lavender polish. Yes, we've had all sorts over the years," she said quickly, when Tuppence broached the subject. Commercial travellers, summer families, even an artist or two. But no one of the description you give. A woman like that? No, never. Her denial came too swiftly, Tuppence thought, too rehearsed. The woman's eyes darted toward the stairs as if fearing someone might descend at any moment. Tommy asked a few genial questions about the house, the town, the weather, but the landlady's answers grew shorter with each. She seemed eager to be rid of them, almost pushing them toward the door. It was Tuppence who lingered at the foot of the stairs, feigning a loose shoelace. Her eyes caught on the windowsill of the landing above. The paint had flaked away, and in the wood someone had carved two initials, E.M. The letters were shallow but deliberate, cut with a careful hand. When they were back outside in the salt wind, Tommy asked, "Well, you've that look again. What did you see?" "Initials," Tuppence said, her voice taut with suppressed excitement. "E.M. They were carved into the sill upstairs. She was here, Tommy. I'm certain of it. The landlady's denial proves it all the more." He frowned. "But E.M., what does that give us? Hundreds of names could match." "Perhaps. But it's a beginning. A woman with those initials connected to the mission hiding here. Why hide unless she carried knowledge worth silencing?" They walked along the promenade, the sea booming against the breakwater, gulls crying above. The town was quiet, shuttered for the off-season, its amusements boarded up, its streets deserted save for the occasional fisherman hauling nets. Tuppence felt the weight of the photograph in her handbag. The half-shadowed face, the carved initials, the landlady's nervous eyes, all fitted together like the edge pieces of a puzzle. Somewhere within lay the truth of Greaves's final command. As the tide crashed below and the wind whipped her scarf, she whispered, almost to herself, "Find the woman. Very well. We shall." And with that, the path of their investigation shifted once again, leading them deeper into secrets that refused to fade, secrets carved not only into wood, but into the very bones of history. The rain followed them back inland, tapping against the carriage windows like impatient fingers. The mystery of EM had begun, and with it, the sense that the game was tightening, drawing them closer to the heart of a truth long buried and fiercely guarded. Morning broke pale and uncertain over the seaside town. The gulls shrieked their usual quarrels above the rooftops, and the tide slapped indifferently against the breakwater. But the Beresfords awoke to news that silenced the little community. Mrs. Arkwright, landlady of Seaview House, had been found dead at the foot of her own staircase. The news reached them in the dining room of their modest hotel, delivered by a waiter with relish only half concealed. "Terrible accident, sir," he said, setting down Tommy's eggs. "Slipped, poor lady. Broke her neck, they say." Tuppence's fork paused midway to her plate. She glanced at Tommy, whose expression had already darkened. "Accident?" he asked. "That's what the constable says," the waiter replied cheerfully, as though such tragedies lent useful variety to a dull season. "Household found her at dawn. Stairs can be treacherous, you know, especially in old places." When he had gone, Tommy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Convenient, isn't it? We ask questions about a woman the landlady denied ever lodging, and the very next morning she breaks her neck." "Too convenient," Tuppence murmured. Her eyes, sharp as glass, were fixed not on her breakfast, but on the rain-streaked window. "I saw her hands last night, nervous, fidgeting. That was not the behaviour of a woman with nothing to hide, and now she is silenced." They finished quickly, then made their way to Seaview House. A small knot of neighbours had already gathered at the gate, whispering. A constable, young and earnest, barred the door. "No entry," he said firmly. "Tragic business. The doctor says she died instantly. Slipped in the dark." Tommy produced his most genial smile. "Yes, of course. But might we speak to the doctor? We were acquainted with Mrs. Arkwright only yesterday." The constable hesitated, then admitted them to the hallway where Dr. Pearson, a brisk man with pince-nez, was preparing to leave. He shook his head gravely. "Neck broken. She fell from the top landing. Nothing to be done." Tuppence's eyes travelled to the staircase. The banister gleamed with polish, the steps worn by decades of feet. But her gaze snagged on a detail others might have missed, a scatter of scuff marks near the top, as though shoes had scraped violently against the wood. "Doctor," she said quietly, "would you say she simply fell, or that she was pushed?" The doctor frowned, adjusting his spectacles. There were bruises on her arms, true, Could be from the fall, could be otherwise, but such questions are beyond my brief. The constable is satisfied. Satisfied, perhaps, but not Tuppence. She tugged Tommy's sleeve, and together they slipped away upstairs under pretence of searching for a handkerchief she had dropped. The landing smelled faintly of lavender, overlaid with something metallic, blood, hastily wiped. On the sill of the window, the initials she had seen the previous night, E.M., gleamed more starkly than ever. Someone wanted her silence, Tuppence whispered. And achieved it neatly, Tommy replied grimly. Their search of the upper rooms was hurried, conscious of the constable below. Yet in the attic they found what they had not dared to hope, a battered trunk, shoved beneath a dormer window. Inside, among moth-eaten blankets, lay a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. Tuppence lifted them reverently. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the writing leapt at once into meaning, not sentences, but columns of numbers and words in patterns unmistakably coded. Tommy exhaled. A code. More of it. Good heavens, this house was no innocent lodging. She kept them hidden all these years. They stuffed the letters into a satchel just as a noise below warned them of company. A man's voice, harsh and agitated, drifted up the stairs. "Where is she? What's happened? I must see her." Descending cautiously, they saw him, a wiry fellow in a shabby coat, eyes darting like a trapped animal's. He ignored the constable's attempts to calm him and made for the stairs until Tommy blocked his path. "Easy there," Tommy said firmly. "Who are you?" The man's voice shook. "A lodger, named Simmons. I lodged here these past months. She looked after me." "Then why run now?" Tuppence asked shrewdly. At that, Simmons paled. He glanced around as though walls themselves listened, then bolted for the door. The constable shouted, giving chase, but Simmons vanished into the tangle of lanes beyond. "A guilty conscience," the constable declared. "Likely he pushed her." But Tuppence shook her head. "No, he ran from fear, not guilt. There's a difference." Later that day, back in their hotel room, they examined the letters. Tuppence spread them across the bedspread, her eyes glowing with the thrill of pursuit. "They are all coded," she said. "Look, each one begins with a date and ends with initials. Always the same. E.M. "E.M. again," Tommy muttered. "So the woman left her mark here too. These letters must be hers." Hours passed as they puzzled over the symbols. The code was intricate, perhaps unbreakable without the stolen book. Yet patterns emerged. References to locations in France, names half concealed, phrases like shipment secured and message delivered. "These are wartime reports," Tuppence whispered. She was the courier. She carried the names. "Then why leave them here?" Tommy asked. "Because someone pursued her even then," Tuppence replied. "Perhaps Mrs. Arkwright hid them for her. Perhaps she kept them as insurance. Either way, their existence was dangerous." A knock startled them. The constable entered, hat in hand. "We found your Mr. Simmons. He claims he's innocent, says he only fled because he feared being dragged into trouble. We checked his story. He's the son of a deserter, lived here in shame. The landlady took pity on him. Foolish fellow, but not a murderer." When he had gone, Tommy looked at Tuppence. "So, our red herring swims away. The real hunter remains." She nodded, her fingers tracing the faded ink of the letters. Someone silenced Mrs. Arkwright to erase E.M.'s trail. But they failed, because we have it now. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the panes. The sea thundered in the distance like a restless jury. And within the quiet room, Tommy and Tuppence bent over their prize, knowing that every word carried the weight of betrayal, and that the hands which had struck once might strike again. The boarding house, with its peeling paint and nervous landlady, had yielded its secret in death. Yet the greater mystery only deepened. Who was E.M., and why did her shadow stretch so far into the present? The Beresfords sat late into the night, the coded letters spread like playing cards between them, each line a challenge, each symbol a whisper from the past. And somewhere beyond the shuttered windows, in the dark streets of the town, the unseen watcher moved again, biding his time. The road back to the countryside was washed with rain. Fields stretched sodden beneath a sky the colour of pewter, hedges glistening, ditches swollen. The motorcar ploughed on doggedly, headlights slanting through drizzle, while inside the Beresfords sat silent, each absorbed in the coded letters they carried in a battered satchel between them. Tuppence broke the silence at last. "We must tell Spence. He is the only one still alive who can confirm these letters, and if he concealed the truth once, he must now reveal it." Tommy grunted. "I hope you're right. Spence struck me as honest, but honesty and secrecy are sometimes brothers in the service. He might not thank us for bringing this to his door." But they went nonetheless, for if anyone could help them decipher EM's shadowy role, it was the Colonel. Spence received them in his study. The fire burned low, the curtains drawn though it was scarcely afternoon. The atmosphere had shifted since their last visit. The man himself seemed diminished, as though years had pressed down more heavily in mere days. He greeted them with courtesy, but his eyes betrayed weariness. "You've found something," he said simply. Tuppence placed the satchel on his desk. One by one she laid out the coded letters, their ribbons still binding them. Spence's hands trembled slightly as he touched the papers. "Good Lord," he murmured. "I thought these lost, or destroyed. Where in heaven's name did you get them?" "At Seaview House," Tuppence replied. "The landlady is dead. A fall, or perhaps a push. But before her death she denied knowing anything. These were hidden in her attic." Spence's face darkened. "Mrs. Arkwright?" "Yes. She knew more than she ever admitted. I should have guessed." Tommy leaned forward. "Colonel, you know what these mean. Tell us the truth. You said before you weren't directly involved. But you were, weren't you?" The Colonel's shoulders sagged. He stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking, his voice low. "Yes, I was involved. More deeply than I cared to admit. The mission was mine, or rather, I was tasked with its oversight. A courier team, entrusted with something too volatile for official channels. That list, those cursed names. Double agents, men who pretended loyalty to king and country while feeding scraps to the enemy. If that list had reached Berlin, dozens of brave souls would have died. If it had been leaked at home, reputations would have shattered, careers ended, families ruined." Tuppence said softly, "And if it resurfaces now?" Spence's gaze met hers, bleak and steady. "Then it will destroy still more. Many who betrayed us became pillars of society afterward. Politicians, businessmen, officials, their sins buried beneath victory. If those sins are dragged up again, it will not merely be their reputations, it may be their lives. Some secrets, Mrs. Beresford, are too poisonous to exhume." The words hung heavy. Tommy shifted uneasily. "So that was why you concealed your involvement. To protect them?" "To protect Britain," Spence said harshly. "We needed stability after the war. Truth is a fine thing, Beresford, but truth can also ruin nations." Tuppence's eyes gleamed with something close to defiance, and yet someone believes the truth is dangerous enough still to kill for. As though summoned by her words, the telephone shrilled suddenly, harsh and jarring in the quiet study. Spence rose, snatched the receiver and barked a curt greeting. The Beresfords could hear only his side of the conversation, but it was enough. His face drained of colour, his lips tightening. Yes, I understand," he muttered. "But you are wrong if you think—" He broke off, listening, then said sharply, "That phrase, how dare you?" He slammed the receiver down, his hand shaking. "What was it?" Tommy demanded. Spence sank into his chair. "They used a phrase, a code phrase only our unit knew. The raven flies at midnight. That was our signal once, meaning all was lost. Only someone from the mission could know it. One of them still lives." Tuppence leaned forward. "And they wanted to remind you?" "Yes. To warn me, or to accuse me?" For a moment suspicion coiled in the room like smoke. Tommy, unable to help himself, voiced it. "Colonel, forgive me, but if you were in charge, might it be you they suspect? That you concealed the list for your own ends?" Spence's eyes blazed. "Good God, man! Do you think me a traitor after all these years?" Tommy flushed, but Tuppence's calm steadied them both. "Suspicion falls where secrecy lies," she said gently. "You must understand that. If you hid your part once, why should others not think you still hide more?" The Colonel drew a long, shuddering breath. His anger ebbed, leaving only exhaustion. "Perhaps you are right. My silence has damned me more thoroughly than any evidence. But I swear to you, I sought only to bury a dangerous past. If I erred, it was in cowardice, not in treachery." The fire popped, scattering sparks, Outside, the rain lashed against the windows, wind moaning in the chimneys. The house seemed besieged by the storm and by shadows both without and within. Tuppence said quietly, "Then we must find who still lives, who speaks in your code, and above all, what they mean to do with the truth." Spence leaned forward suddenly, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "Be careful, Mrs. Beresford. They will not hesitate. Already blood has been spilt. Yours may be next." A silence followed, heavy and absolute. Then Tommy rose, decisive. "We'll not run from it. Whoever this shadow is, they've made a mistake in showing their hand. We'll follow the trail, however dark it grows." Tuppence met her husband's gaze, a spark of triumph in her eyes. Exactly so. But as they departed the Colonel's house, stepping once more into the rain-swept dusk, a doubt lingered. For though Spence had spoken earnestly, the question gnawed at them both. Was he victim or architect? And if the phrase had come from someone else, then how long had that someone been watching, listening, waiting for the right moment to strike again? The shadows of the past were no longer confined to memory. They had reached forward, cold fingers closing around the present, and Tommy and Tuppence knew they were now tangled in a net spun decades ago, a net that might tighten until none escaped. The storm arrived with punctual fury, as though it had been invited. Wind clawed at the cottage eaves, rattling the shutters, while rain lashed the windows in relentless sheets. Inside, firelight flickered across drawn faces, shadows lengthening against plaster walls. The Beresfords' sitting room, usually a place of cheerful muddle and domestic warmth, had been transformed into a chamber of reckoning. Tommy and Tuppence had summoned the surviving members of the mission, each reluctantly persuaded to attend. Now they sat in a semicircle before the hearth, a tableau of secrets wrapped in damp coats and wary glances. Colonel Spence presided grimly in an armchair, his moustache bristling, eyes hooded. To his left lounged Lady Audley, her pearls flashing even in dim light, her beauty of a faded but still dangerous kind. She had once been admired for her charm. Tonight it seemed more like armour. Beside her, Professor Redding, his spectacles fogged, twitched endlessly at his cuffs, the nervous scholar turned unwilling witness. At the far end, Major Easton slouched with the insolence of a man who had long ago ceased to care what anyone thought, his debts whispered of in more than one club. And there were others, a retired civil servant whose record was spotless on paper, though rumours hinted otherwise, a widow with political leanings once considered questionable, a quiet man who had been a clerk in intelligence, too unremarkable then and too invisible now. Each carried with them the weight of years, and the knowledge that one among them was a traitor still. Tommy stood, hands braced on the mantelpiece. His voice, though calm, carried the edge of command. "We are gathered here for one reason. The mission we all recall ended in silence and shadow, but the past has returned. Sir Lionel Greaves lies poisoned, Mrs. Arkwright is dead, and threats have been made. Whoever orchestrates this believes they can frighten us into submission. We are here to prove them wrong." A murmur of unease rippled through the group. Lady Audley's laugh, brittle as glass, cut through it. "Really, Beresford, this melodrama may suit a stage play, but do you imagine any of us, after all these years, have energy enough for treachery?" Tuppence answered from her place by the tea-tray. Her voice was soft but sure. "Energy or not, Lady Audley, someone has found it convenient to kill. That suggests motive remains very much alive." The fire spat sparks. Silence pressed heavy, punctuated only by the hiss of rain. Then Professor Redding leaned forward, voice low. "We always suspected Redfern. He is dead now. Must we not accept that his guilt died with him?" "No," Spence said sharply. "Redfern was a scapegoat, nothing more. Tonight proves it. One of us here is still playing the game." It was then that Tommy felt a crumple of paper in his pocket. Surprised, he drew it out, unfolding the sheet under the candlelight. His expression froze. "Well?" Easton demanded. Tommy's jaw clenched. "Someone has been busy." He held up the paper, the words scrawled across it stark and unmistakable. "Tuppence Beresford is the traitor. Trust her not." Gasps broke the stillness. Lady Audley pressed a hand to her pearls. The widow drew back as though scorched. Tuppence rose, her eyes flashing. "How dare you? A coward slips this into a pocket and calls it proof. You will look me in the face and say so, or hold your tongues." But suspicion, once seeded, spread swiftly. The civil servant cleared his throat, muttering about influence from unusual quarters. The professor stared at his shoes. Only Tommy's voice rang out, hard as steel. "My wife is no traitor. She has risked her life often enough for this country, while some of you were playing both ends for profit or politics. Whoever wrote this did so to divide us." Spence leaned forward, studying the paper. His eyes narrowed. "The handwriting, it is familiar." "Yes," Tuppence said sharply. "It matches the torn page from the parish register. The same hand, the same determination to erase a name." The room shifted uneasily, the group dividing into suspicion and defence, whispers colliding. Thunder rolled above, rattling the panes. In the midst of it, Tuppence poured tea, her hand steady though her heart raced. If they were to be accused, let them be accused over the most English of rituals. Cups were distributed, sugar stirred, spoons clinked. Conversation, brittle, resumed. And then Lady Audley raised her cup, took a sip, and hesitated. Her eyes flickered to Tuppence's, then away. She set the cup down untouched. Tuppence's own hand froze halfway to her lips. A moment earlier, as she passed the sugar, she had idly swapped cups with Lady Audley. "Poison," she said quietly, "in the tea." An uproar followed. The civil servant knocked his chair back in horror. Easton cursed, fists clenched. Spence demanded order. Tommy seized the cup, sniffed it, grimaced. Bitter almonds, cyanide. The implication was clear. Someone had attempted to silence Tuppence, not by forged accusation alone, but by death. Eyes darted, suspicion thickened. Lady Audley swore she had touched nothing. The professor wrung his hands. Easton barked that he never drank tea. But none could account for the moment when the cups were poured, when hands moved in shadow, when poison slipped into porcelain. Tuppence set the lethal cup aside with measured calm. "Someone here is desperate enough to kill me rather than face discovery. That alone tells us how close we are." Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the storm had broken among them. Each survivor glared at the other, secrets straining at their seams. Debt, affair, sympathy with lost causes, all whispered in corners, all now dragged into the open. But beneath it all, the truth remained veiled. The traitor was still masked, still cunning enough to turn suspicion in every direction. Only one clue stood firm: the handwriting. The same hand that had torn a page from the parish records had now written an accusation against Tuppence, and somewhere in that scrawl lay the key to unmasking the shadow that stalked them all. The rain had been falling since dusk, and by midnight it was a deluge. Water streamed off the church roof, thunder rattled the bell tower, and lightning lit the sky in stark white flashes that turned the graveyard into a landscape of broken statues and skeletal trees. Tommy pulled his collar higher and tightened his grip on the torch. Beside him, Tuppence pressed on, her scarf whipping in the gale, her face pale, but resolute. The storm was no deterrent. It was almost as though the night itself had chosen to witness the unmasking of truths long buried. "The parish records are here," she said, raising her voice above the wind. "Spence told us the oldest registers are locked in the vestry. If E.M. hid her secret, this is where we'll find it." "And if our shadow has guessed the same," Tommy asked grimly, "then we may not be alone." They pushed the heavy door open. It groaned on its hinges, admitting them into the cold hush of the nave. Candles guttered on the altar, left by some pious soul earlier in the evening, their flames trembling in draughts that swept through the aisles. The smell of damp stone, wax and mildew enveloped them. Their footsteps echoed as they crossed toward the vestry. Tommy's torch beam swept over carved pews, the gleam of brass, the dark stare of stained glass saints. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak of timber overhead a signal that someone else might be near. The vestry door was locked, as expected, but the Beresfords had come prepared. Tuppence produced a small key, borrowed under pretext from the vicar's distracted curate. She fitted it into the lock. It turned with a reluctant click. Inside lay the registers, great tomes bound in cracked leather, their spines lined neatly on shelves. Tuppence ran her fingers across them, searching for the volume marked 1943. She pulled it free, heavy as stone, and laid it on the vestry table. The book fell open with a sigh. Pages fluttered, revealing columns of names. Baptisms, marriages, burials, ordinary records of village life. Yet in the margin of one page, faintly inscribed, initials appeared, E.M. "There," Tuppence whispered. "Her mark. She wanted us to know she was here, that she survived." Lightning flared, illuminating the stained glass. In that moment, Tommy saw movement, a figure slipping between the pews, silent as shadow. "We're not alone," he said tensely. The figure stepped forward, revealed in the wavering torchlight. Not Lady Audley, nor Easton, nor any of the flamboyant suspects they had considered. Instead, it was Hughes, the curate, the quiet, nervous young man who had always faded into the background. His face, pale and taut, was transformed by a grim smile. "You should not have come." Tuppence drew a breath. "It was you, all along, you, who erased the page, who poisoned Greaves, who pushed Mrs. Arkwright." He inclined his head, as though conceding a point in debate. "She kept the letters too long. Greaves knew too much. And you meddled, always meddling. Better you had left the past buried." Tommy stepped between them, his voice like iron. "Why? Why now?" The curate's eyes gleamed. "Because the list is still mine to control. Those names, men who betrayed us, men who betrayed their own souls, still matter. Their children sit in Parliament, their legacies unblemished. With that list I hold the power to ruin them, or to sell it if I choose. The world is shifting again. Secrets are currency. I intend to be rich." Tuppence's gaze sharpened. "E.M. was the courier, wasn't she? She carried the list. She entrusted it here, hidden in the parish records. And you used your position to find it." Hughes's smile thinned. "I found it years ago, but I needed silence around me. Loose ends cut. Arkwright, Greaves, even Redfern long before. They were all liabilities. And now you." He took a step closer, voice low and deliberate. "She'd even penciled your old countersign in a margin. The raven flies at midnight. Easy enough to borrow for a telephone performance." His gaze dropped briefly to his boots, slick with rain. "Surplus stores sell more than cassocks. Those souls are cheap and quiet." Then he raised his head, the grim smile returning. In his hand glinted a revolver, black against the candlelight. Tommy's mind raced. Then he saw it, the faint smear on Hughes's sleeve, the unmistakable scent hanging in the air. Cigar smoke. "You've overplayed your hand," Tommy said suddenly. "That ash at our cottage, it was yours. Redfern's brand, wasn't it? You wanted us to believe the dead man lived again. But you forgot. You've grown careless. You smoked the same brand tonight. The smell clings to you." For the first time, Hughes faltered. His grip on the revolver wavered. Tuppence seized the moment. With a swift motion, she hurled the heavy register from the table. It struck his arm, the gun clattering to the floor. The chase was chaos. Hughes bolted, darting through the nave, pushing over chairs to slow pursuit. Tommy lunged after him, but the curate was quick, driven by desperation. He crashed through the side door into the graveyard, rain lashing his face, mud sucking at his shoes. Tuppence followed, skirts whipping in the storm. Gravestones loomed like sentinels, the ground slick. Hughes slipped, recovered, and fled toward the lich gate. Tuppence gained on him, her breath ragged, heart pounding. Then a stumble. Her foot caught in the roots of a yew, and she fell hard. The wind knocked from her. Hughes wheeled, seizing the chance. He loomed above her, hand raised, eyes blazing with triumph. "Curiosity kills," he spat. But Tommy was there, hurling himself forward. He struck Hughes with the force of a tackle honed on schoolfields long ago. The curate reeled, crashing against a tombstone. The fight was brief but furious. Fists, mud, the storm itself howling around them. In the end, Hughes sagged, breathless, defeated, his face pressed to the sodden earth. Tommy hauled him upright, iron grip unyielding. "It's over. The game is done." From Hughes's cassock satchel, Tommy drew out the stolen codebook. The brown paper was gone, but their mark on the flyleaf was unmistakable. Tuppence rose, shaken but unbowed. She looked at Hughes, her voice quiet yet sharp as a blade. You thought invisibility made you safe, but it was your undoing. We see you now." The church bell, struck by lightning, tolled a single heavy note. It reverberated across the graveyard as though the night itself pronounced judgment. Inside once more, the Beresfords laid the final register on the vestry table. Within its pages, carefully folded, was the list, names written in EM's hand. Men and women who had played both sides, their secrets frozen in ink. Tommy stared at it, awe mingling with dismay. So this is what they all died for. Tuppence touched the paper lightly. EM carried it, kept it, marked her trail so one day it could be found. But it was never meant for greed or vengeance. It was meant for justice. Outside, the storm began to ebb, its fury spent. Rain softened, thunder retreated. Yet within the church the silence was heavier still, for they held in their hands not merely paper, but lives, past, present, and future. The curate, bound and sullen, was taken away by the constable summoned at dawn. His protests were feeble now, his cunning stripped bare. Tommy and Tuppence stood together in the doorway of the church, watching the light creep across the horizon. The graveyard glistened, washed clean by the night's tempest. Tommy exhaled, long and slow. "We've unmasked him, but I wonder if the ghosts will rest even now." Tuppence slipped her hand into his. Ghosts never rest entirely, but truth, once spoken, leaves less room for shadows. They walked back through the sodden grass, side by side, the register safe in Tuppence's satchel. The mission, at last, was revealed, and though the storm had passed, the echoes of it would remain, for in every secret uncovered there lingers the price of knowing. Dawn came shyly, as though reluctant to tread where the storm had raged. The sky, washed clean, glowed in pale hues of rose and pearl. Clouds drifted apart like weary armies dispersing after battle, and the first bells of the church began their morning peal, solemn yet hopeful. Their sound rolled over the damp fields, through the dripping hedgerows, across the little village whose secrets had been forced into the light. Tommy and Tuppence stood side by side outside the church porch, their clothes still damp from the night's ordeal. The curate, no longer the mild, forgettable figure who had blended into parish life, was led away between two constables, his hands bound, his eyes hollow. He did not struggle. The fight had gone out of him, leaving only a man whose ambition had devoured his soul. Colonel Spence approached, leaning on his stick. His face bore both relief and sorrow. "So it is ended," he said quietly. Word came from St. James's by mid-morning. Sir Lionel Greaves would recover. "Ended, yes," Tommy replied, "but not forgotten. Some wounds never quite close." Spence nodded gravely. "I wronged you, Beresford. I wronged you both. By hiding the truth, I allowed suspicion to fester where clarity should have reigned. You've done what I could not. You've finished the mission." Tuppence's smile was gentle, though her eyes were still keen. "We've only done our part. It was EM who carried the burden, who left her trail so that justice might one day be served. Without her courage, nothing would have been possible." At that name, Spence bowed his head. Emily Marchant, that was her name. "EM," Tuppence murmured. "Emily Marchant. A courier of uncommon bravery. She vanished after the mission. Some said she perished, others that she lived in obscurity. Now I see she lived long enough to entrust her secret to others, and to faith that truth would not be buried forever." They re-entered the vestry, where the great leather register still lay open. Upon the table rested the recovered list, its faded ink now evidence enough to seal reputations, to change histories if it were loosed into the world. Spence reached for it, his hand trembling slightly. "This is mine to guard," he said. "Not for ambition nor for gain. I shall place it in the archives under seal, where it will harm no one and serve only scholars when centuries have dulled its sting. Let the living be spared." Tommy studied him for a moment, then inclined his head. "You are the proper custodian. But promise us, never again silence through fear. Secrets fester, they destroy more surely than bullets." The colonel's eyes softened. "On my honour, Beresford. The lesson is learned. Too late for some, but not for all." The surviving members of the old mission gathered later that morning in the colonel's study. Lady Audley, subdued but still composed, offered no more brittle laughter. Her beauty seemed gentler in resignation. Professor Redding, eyes red-rimmed, confessed his guilt at years of cowardice, though he had betrayed no one. Easton, unshaven, muttered of debts and follies, but his bluster had drained away with the storm. Suspicion, once sharp, had ebbed. In its place lingered something closer to reconciliation, an acceptance that the past, with all its treacheries and sacrifices, had at last been faced. None were wholly innocent, yet none save the curate had been truly damned. "It is strange," Lady Audley murmured, gazing into her untouched teacup. "To think we survived war, only to be hunted by its echoes." Tuppence answered softly, "Echoes can be louder than the guns themselves, but even echoes fade in time." That evening, the Beresfords returned to their own cottage. The storm had left its mark, branches strewn across the path, puddles gleaming like mirrors, the thatch dripping steadily. Yet the little home welcomed them, its hearth awaiting their return. Albert, their long-suffering manservant, had set a pot to simmer. The smell of stew and fresh bread greeted them as though nothing more sinister than weather had ever troubled the day. The contrast was almost surreal. Tommy settled into his armchair with a groan of contentment. "I'd forgotten what dry socks felt like," he muttered. Tuppence laughed, a low ripple that eased the heaviness in the room. She curled into her chair opposite, the fire painting her face with warmth. Between them, on the mantelpiece, lay the old codebook, the very parcel that had begun the adventure. Its brown paper wrapping was long gone, but the book remained, worn and enigmatic, a reminder of the mission that had returned from the past. Tommy regarded it thoughtfully. Strange, isn't it, that such an unassuming object could stir death, betrayal, and truth across decades? "Not strange," Tuppence corrected gently. "That is the nature of mysteries. They never truly die. They wait quietly, patiently, until someone asks the right question, opens the wrong drawer, or remembers a face half hidden in shadow." He smiled, weary but fond. "And you, of course, cannot resist asking." "Would you have me any other way?" she countered, eyes dancing. Tommy considered. "No, though next time I should prefer the mystery to involve less poison, fewer guns, and perhaps a warm seaside instead of a storm." They shared a laugh, the sound mingling with the crackle of the fire. The storm outside had passed, the night was calm, and for the first time in many days peace settled upon them. Later, as the fire burned low, Tommy gazed into the embers, his voice reflective. "We've lived through 2 wars, countless intrigues, more riddles than I care to count. And yet it is always the same, isn't it? Truth weighed against silence, the past demanding to be heard." Tuppence reached across, her hand covering his. "And it is always us, together, answering that call. That is what matters." He turned his hand, clasping hers warmly. "Together." The bells of the church tolled once more, their sound drifting across the sleeping village. The dawn had brought justice, the dusk brought rest. And in the small cottage, with the storm of decades finally laid to rest, Tommy and Tuppence sat side by side, warmed by firelight, their banter intact, their bond unbroken. The mission was over, the truth was safe, but the spirit of adventure they both knew would never be wholly silenced, not while mysteries lingered in the world, waiting.